G'day, HMR here. And I'd like to talk about here counterdependency and versus codependency, but I won't say so much about codependency at this juncture yet because I want to focus more on counterdependency and then go from there. So counterdependency, before I get into kind of what is it, a lot of people want to know what causes it, right? And so counterdependency is often caused by adverse childhood experiences, trauma in childhood. And so many people with counterdependency, which might come after codependency or instead of, have trauma in their childhoods, which is, part of the healing recovery journey after the BPD-NPD relationship, or often for people, a cluster B parent and that relationship type. So people who develop counterdependency, it's the opposite of codependency really, but very similarly have often in childhood gone through neglect, abandonment, been really hurt by somebody, traumatized or abused by somebody that really was supposed to protect them. So that's a pretty huge factor in all of this. And people don't talk as much about counterdependency as we do about codependency. And yet, in the last video that I did, what that individual, what the commenter was forwarding was very much a position that was more than likely from a counter-dependent position than a codependent position. So I have a couple of notes here, but so a little more about counterdependency and codependency, but what are the signs of counterdependency? So codependency has been kind of sort of all the rage, right? Because it's very, very much talked about, but as I've heard from clients even recently, needs to be a lot more talked about in videos. And so, people with codependency are people who put up with a lot of problematic behaviors and or abuse, and then some from others. And it can be a deep-seated fear of separation. So an inability to handle loss, for example, which, codependency begins in childhood. So it's about that kind of whatever impacted or was an adverse experience in childhood or traumatic in childhood. So a deep fear of separation or fear of being alone or fear of not being in a relationship or feeling unworthy if you're not in a relationship. A lot of things, right, that I've done live streams on and talked about in videos about what codependency is. So people with codependency also have impaired levels of autonomy. That's what I'm speaking about too when I'm referring often to the dysfunctional relationship to and with self. So the enabling, the rescuing, the fixing, all of that, and expecting that somehow it will work or change anything for the other person or yourself, which people may not be as consciously aware that that's what you're really trying to accomplish or do, or why you really want to help the other person out. Not the only reason, but because you need what you need too. But people with codependency, lacking this sort of self-autonomy and the repetition compulsions externalize that out onto the person with BPD or NPD, or you learn to do that in childhood for various different reasons, or because you had a cluster B parent. And so dependency is a definite problem that so many people are dealing with after these relationships or, from childhood. Some people can come out of childhood with counterdependency, but then they're unlikely to be in relationships as much or as often, or maybe to get into a relationship with a BPD or NPD could happen though. And what else was I going to say about that? I got to just look down at a couple of points here on my notes. But yeah, so dependency is obviously something that's at the core of codependency and counterdependency, and in a different way, but not wholly, in dependent personality disorder. So also, this dependency is really core, like I said, but and it's pretty common. People come to therapy with this, whether it's counterdependency, codependency, dependent personality disorder, dependency, right? Emotional dependency. And this is learned in childhood. But it's not as much talked about as codependency. And so it's really important for people to think about this too, because sometimes people go from, a cluster B relationship and or a cluster B parent, and then a cluster B relationship with a borderline or narcissist. You might be more in that codependency place, and then some people can end up going from codependence to counterdependence. And it's kind of like from one extreme to the other extreme, missing the middle of like what would be really healthy to find in therapy and a healing recovery journey. Out here to work with you if I resonate with you. Just a little reminder. So maladaptive dependency is what's involved in codependency and counterdependency, and it's fundamentally about a failure or inability, never being taught. Your childhood experience kind of informs you that so in this sense, quote, failure, unquote, to trust oneself, to manage life separately from others. So this, again, remember, starts in childhood. So there are many things that contribute to counterdependency, and it's often in its earliest developmental roots, and it's an insecure attachment pattern that results in the emergence basically of avoidant attachment style, This is when people are going to be really more counterdependent than codependent, but there can be some overlap. And the styles emerge, the attachment styles, etc., and relational styles of anything to do with dependency in the middle of codependency or counterdependency emerge also from an avoidant attachment, can emerge from an avoidant attachment. So, and this style of attachment is from misattunement between infant and caregivers, or could be from abuse. So again, this would be if this happened to a young child or infant that had a more resilient temperament, there's a chance that you get almost the same wounding for codependency and or counterdependency, or people can go from one to the other extreme. You could get almost a similar kind of wounding as a person with BPD, but if you have a more resilient temperament, then it can be made manifest in your life often through relationships with a BPD or an NPD, that comes in these two different attachment style issues, and the core of what the dependency versus self-agency, so codependency lacks self-agency, and so does counterdependency. And so also the key in understanding counterdependency is differentiating it from healthy autonomy, right? So counterdependence is when people, it's sort of like the flight from intimacy. There's a book by that title. It's been described that way because a lot of people with codependency have issues with emotional intimacy to varying degrees. But people with counterdependency, it gets a little bit more, it's a little bit more entrenched. It's sort of like people that want to just go it on their own and think that that's healthy autonomy. But it's not. It's sort of like a really dichotomous, extreme one side where people won't be able to achieve interdependency with anyone, or maybe even be able to trust anyone. So healthy autonomy is a state of confident self-reliance in which the individual an individual recognizes that their interdependency, that you can become interdependent with others, which is healthy relating. But people with codependency or counterdependency from childhood trauma or abuse or neglect, etc., and or from a relationship with BPD and NPD person in adulthood, it's not, you're not going to find interdependency without therapy, because it will remain codependency. And like I said, for some people, go from codependency to counterdependency. So, and also an agentic sense of self is very important, for healthy relating. In what is at its base, healthy relating is not dependent relating, codependent or counterdependent. Healthy relating is that interdependency, which is also means that one has to know oneself well, have a healthy relationship to and with oneself, and have an agentic sense of self. A sense of self that one can effectively have agency over one's destiny, and that you're not looking to others to meet any of your needs, that you can meet your own needs, and that you're not unduly controlled or influenced by others. And so the main defining feature of healthy autonomy, which is speaking about healthy relationships, right, which really isn't the focus here on the channel or what most people are experiencing when you come to the videos or the live streams. So the defining feature of healthy autonomy is the autonomy motive is an approach mindset. So approach, interdependent, with self-esteem and self-worth, and that type of thing. And it means that an individual desires to be relatively self-reliant because they want to recognize their full potential as an individual, but they want to simultaneously and securely interconnect with others in different relationship types. And the second aspect of healthy autonomous individuals is they can regularly form effective, meaningful, intimate, long-term relations with others, whether that's friends, co-workers, a family, or a significant other. So they can share, be vulnerable, and are comfortable relying on others when it is reasonable, but not when it's something they could do for themselves, because nobody is an island, right? And so on the surface, counterdependency may look similar to healthy autonomy, but it's not. Because in counterdependency, people are very much isolated, separate, trying to be independent, but it's not the same as the self-agency and the healthy interdependency, because, well, it's counterdependency, not interdependency, which would be healthy. And this mindset, what drives counterdependency is an avoidant mindset. So, and the same can be said to a degree for codependency, but in counterdependency, this avoidant mindset is the avoidance of relying on others because of a fundamental mistrust of the consequences. So not being able to risk that because there isn't enough self-trust in people with codependency, really, or counterdependency, more to the point, that there's no reference for or ability to trust others because there's a fundamental lack of trust for self. And then you can't have trust or intimacy for others, which goes to the last video I did, wherein the commenters seem to be coming from this type of position, which is based on negative core beliefs, negative life experience, painful experience, and it's very much in a dichotomy. It's counterdependency. So basically, people that are counterdependent, like they fear intimacy, right? Like I said, and can't trust others. And they fundamentally, I could say that over again, but sorry. So even in a marriage, a counterdependent person will hide core aspects of their experience and resist showing any dependency needs. So even in sense of interdependency, because no one of us is an island. So there's the codependency, the counterdependency, and then the healthy independence or interdependence, sorry. So there's always going to be some level of dependence, but not like codependency or counterdependency, because nobody's an island. And sometimes you might need a little support or it'll help with something, but not something that you would want to get through other, that you can't provide for yourself reasonably to a degree, or wait if somebody isn't available. Take care of your own needs, in other words, again. So, yeah, the other thing I think I wanted to say about this was that, yeah, people with, so instead, people with counterdependency, instead of, they often will have this superficial confidence or separate and avoid whenever need or opportunity for deep emotional connection or intimacy surfaces, emotional intimacy. And it can be a very frustrating experience if somebody is the partner of somebody with counterdependency. In fact, it will probably be part of the relationship breakdown, just as codependency doesn't help people with BPD or NPD, and they don't help you either. And those relationships don't last. So codependency has been, counterdependency. What are, it's been described as, like in a book, there's a book out there by the title, I think it was written by Janae and Barry Weinhold, and it's called Flight from Intimacy. And I think this happens in codependency too, but in counterdependency, there's these 7 points or signs of counterdependency. And the first one is difficulty being close to others. The second one is a strong need to be right all the time. The third one is self-centered and egotistical, because counterdependency can show up also in narcissistic personality, a little bit different, but that's why some of these signs are sounding a little bit like could be that, right? And also the fourth one is a resistance or refusal to ask for help. And 5, people expect perfection in themselves and others. And the 6th sign of counterdependency is extreme discomfort, appearing weak or vulnerable. So again, protecting, it's about protection, and it's unhealthy because it's out of balance, and you don't trust yourself to be able to trust anybody else to be vulnerable or perhaps have a weak moment in front of people, because we all have those, and they can be healthy to have. And the 7th sign that I'm going to include here of codependency is people that have difficulty relaxing, can't just be with themselves or be with others more specifically, and can be addicted to activities like workaholics, people that exercise, but maybe over-exercise or do a lot of things in pretty extreme ways. So that's just a little bit about, more about counterdependency, which also, I want to just say again, is an extreme opposite to codependency, but it's in the middle where there's interdependency and what healthy relationships, that's one of the bigger defining realities of a healthy relationship. But codependency codependency or counterdependency are not healthy ways of relating to self or to other. So I hope that made sense, and I hope that was somewhat helpful. And I wonder what people are thinking, what you might have to discuss about this, or does this, do you resonate with it? And where do you feel you are? Because a lot of people were always talking about codependency. What about counterdependency? I don't know that a lot of people that have been on my live streams or watch my videos are really counterdependent. But like I said, I think that last video I did, I don't think I can remember the title of. Can I find it here really quickly? I don't know. Yes, BPD-NPD relationship breakup, dichotomy of negative core beliefs, loss of hope. The commenter I'm responding to seems to be describing what may well be counterdependence. So anyway, as always, people should feel free to ask any questions about any aspect of these relationships, codependency or counterdependency, or share your experiences and comment and participate on the channel and share with each other for sure. So counterdependency, I don't think it's talked about enough. Certainly, I haven't talked about it enough. So hopefully this will be helpful to people.